My name is Ella, and I was the invisible daughter in a family that worshipped my brother. My grandmother left me money for art school, but my father stole it to save himself. I forgave him. I moved on. I built a life without them. Then my father died, and in his will, he left me something that changed everything. My name is Ella, Ella Marie Lawson, and for most of my life, I believed that my last name was a promise. A promise of belonging, of safety, of an unbreakable bond. I thought the Lawson family was a fortress, and I was safe inside its walls. I learned the hard way that fortresses can have traitors within the gates, and the wounds they inflict are the kind that never truly heal. They just scar over, a constant, aching reminder of the day the people who were supposed to love you the most decided you were no longer one of them. My story begins, as most do, in a place that felt like the center of the universe. A small, white clapboard house on a quiet, tree-lined street in a town called Harmony Creek, Ohio. The name itself sounds like a lie now. Harmony? There was no harmony, not really. There was just a carefully constructed performance, and I was the star player, completely unaware I was even in a show. I want you to picture that house with me. It had a big front porch with a swing that creaked in the summer breeze. My mother had flower boxes under every window, filled with red geraniums that she tended to like they were her children. The yard was always perfectly mowed, the hedges always perfectly trimmed. Everything about that house said, "We are a happy family, we have our lives together." And for a long time, I believed that advertisement. My father, Richard Lawson, was a man carved from granite and ambition. He was a successful contractor, the kind of guy who could build a house from the ground up with his own two hands. He was respected in the community, a deacon at our church, a man whose handshake was his bond. When he walked into a room, people noticed. He had that kind of presence. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick head of dark hair that only started graying when he was in his 50s. His voice was deep and commanding. When he said something, you listened. You didn't argue with Richard Lawson. My mother, Patricia, was the picture of grace. She was a former English teacher who gave up her career to be a full-time mother and the perfect hostess for my father's business dinners. She planned every meal, every party, every holiday with a military precision that left no room for error. She was beautiful in a quiet, understated way, with soft brown hair she kept in a neat bob and kind eyes that could turn cold in an instant if you crossed her. She wore pearl earrings every single day, even when she was just cleaning the house. She said pearls made her feel put together. And then there was my older brother, Mark. He was 4 years older than me, the golden boy. He was handsome, athletic, and charming, the perfect reflection of my father. He could do no wrong. If he broke a window playing baseball, it was an accident. If I spilled milk, it was a catastrophe. Mark got a new car when he turned 16. I got my mother's old sedan with 100,000 miles on it. Mark got to stay out until midnight. I had to be home by 10. Mark got praised for his B- grades because he was putting his energy into sports. I got asked why my A- wasn't an A+. I was the afterthought, the quiet one who loved to read in the corner of the living room, who spent hours drawing pictures of imaginary worlds in my sketchbook, who preferred the company of our old, lazy golden retriever, Buster, to most people. I was the family's observer, the one who noticed the tiny cracks in the facade long before anyone else. I saw the way my father's smile would tighten after a third whiskey. I saw the flicker of annoyance in my mother's eyes when my father's laughter was a little too loud at a party. I saw the cruel, superior smirk Mark would hide when he got away with something I never could. For a long time, I thought this was just how families worked, that every family had its own secret language of unspoken rules and silent resentments. I accepted my place. I was Ella, the quiet artist, the peacemaker, the one who tried to stay out of the way. I loved them all, fiercely and completely, with the blind, unconditional love that only a child can have. My room was my sanctuary. It was the smallest room in the house, the one that was supposed to be a nursery, but my parents gave it to me because Mark needed the bigger room for his trophies and his sports equipment. I didn't mind. I painted my walls a soft lavender, my favorite color. I covered one entire wall with my drawings. I had a little desk by the window where I would sit for hours, looking out at the oak tree in the backyard, sketching whatever came into my head. Fairies, dragons, castles, princesses, worlds where I mattered, worlds where I was the hero. Buster would often lie on the floor beside me, his big head on his paws, snoring softly. He was my best friend. He didn't care that I wasn't the golden child. He didn't care that I was quiet and awkward. He just loved me. When I cried, which I did more often than anyone knew, he would lift his head and look at me with those big, brown eyes, and I would feel a little less alone. The first real crack appeared when I was 16. My grandmother, my father's mother, passed away. Grandma Rose was my anchor. She was the one who saw me. She'd sit with me for hours, listening to my stories, marveling at my drawings. She told me I had a gift, that my art was a window to a beautiful soul. She was the only one in that house who ever made me feel like I was enough, just as I was. I remember the last time I saw her alive. It was a Sunday afternoon, a few weeks before she died. She was in the nursing home by then, but her mind was still sharp. I brought her a drawing I had made of her garden, the one she had to leave behind when she got sick. It had her rose bushes and her bird bath and the little stone path she had made herself. When I showed it to her, her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Ella," she whispered, pulling me into a hug. "You captured it perfectly. You have such a gift. Don't you ever let anyone tell you different. You hold on to this, you hear me? This is who you are." She held my face in her hands, her papery skin soft against my cheeks. "Promise me you'll never stop drawing. Promise me you'll go to art school and become the artist I always knew you could be." I promised her. I meant it with my whole heart. When she died, she left a small inheritance. It wasn't a fortune, maybe $30,000, but it was everything to me. She left it specifically for my education, for Ella's artistic dreams, her will said. My father, as the executor of her estate, was in charge of it. "It's for college, sweetie," he said, patting my hand at the funeral. "For art school, just like Grandma wanted." I nodded, tears streaming down my face, clutching that promise to my heart like a life raft. It was her final gift, a testament to her belief in me. It made her loss a little more bearable, knowing a part of her dream for me would live on. The funeral was hard, harder than I expected. Standing there in my black dress, watching them lower her into the ground, I felt like a part of me was being buried with her. Mark stood beside me, looking bored, checking his phone when he thought no one was looking. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the grieving daughter-in-law perfectly. My father gave a beautiful eulogy, talking about what a wonderful woman she was, but I noticed he didn't cry. Not once. I cried. I cried for days. I would lock myself in my room and just let the tears come. Buster would whine at my door until I let him in, and he would climb onto my bed and curl up beside me, licking the tears from my cheeks. I missed her so much it felt like a physical pain in my chest. Over the next 2 years, I threw myself into my schoolwork and my art. I took every extra art class I could. I built a portfolio I was proud of. I started applying to schools with strong art programs, my heart set on the Rhode Island School of Design, a place that felt as distant and magical as one of my drawings. I would stay up late at night, looking at pictures of the campus online, imagining myself walking those halls, surrounded by other artists, finally belonging somewhere. I got a part-time job at a local coffee shop to save up extra money. I worked weekends and after school, saving every penny I could. I didn't go to the movies with my friends. I didn't buy new clothes. I just saved. Every dollar brought me closer to my dream. When the acceptance letter came, I was soaring. It was a sunny afternoon in April. I had just gotten home from school, and there it was, a thick envelope from RISD sitting on the kitchen counter. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely open it. When I read the words, "Congratulations, you have been accepted," I screamed. I actually screamed. I ran to show my parents, my joy so immense it felt like it might burst out of my chest. My mother was in the living room, reading a magazine. My father was in his study, going over some papers. I burst in, waving the letter. I got into RISD." My mother looked up, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "That's wonderful, honey." Her voice was flat, like she was reading from a script. My father took the letter, scanned it, and nodded. "Good school, but Ella, we need to talk." The talk happened in his study that evening. The room smelled of leather and old books and his particular brand of authority. He sat behind his massive oak desk, my mother perched on the edge of a chair beside him. I sat across from them, my acceptance letter still warm in my hand. I was still floating on cloud 9, not realizing that I was about to be pushed off. "About the money for school," my father began, his voice calm and measured, the same voice he used to explain a building contract to a client. "We're going to have to dip into your grandmother's inheritance for it, but it's not going to stretch as far as we thought." I felt a tiny flutter of unease, but I pushed it away. "That's okay, Dad, it's a start. I can get student loans for the rest. I've been saving too, from my job. I have almost $5,000. He cleared his throat, exchanging a look with my mother. That look. I would come to recognize it years later. It was the look they shared when they were about to deliver bad news, when they were presenting a united front against me. "Well, that's the thing," he said, his voice smooth as glass. "The money. It's not all there." My world tilted just slightly. "What do you mean?" "The market took a downturn a couple of years ago," he explained. "I had to make some difficult financial decisions to protect the family. I had to use some of the money from Grandma's estate to cover some business expenses. It was an investment. I was going to pay it back with interest before you needed it. But then the market crashed further and, well, the business took a hit. It's gone, Ella, all of it." Gone, the word hung in the air, heavy and cold. $30,000. Grandma Rose's dream for me. Gone. I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh, to say it was a joke. But his face was serious, too serious. My mother was looking down at her hands. You used it?" My voice was a whisper. "It was for my art school. It was all she wanted." "And what I want is to keep a roof over your head and food on this table," my father snapped, his calm facade cracking for a second. He slammed his hand on the desk, making me jump. "Do you think this is easy for me? To admit I made a mistake? I did it for this family, for all of us. The business was struggling. If I hadn't used that money, we could have lost this house. Everything. You're not a child anymore, Ella. It's time you understood that the world doesn't revolve around your artistic dreams." My mother leaned forward, her voice soft and pleading. "He's right, honey. It was a sacrifice. A sacrifice your father made for all of us. We're a family. We have to stick together. You can still go to college, just maybe not that one. State school is perfectly fine. You can still do your art on the side." Tears were streaming down my face now. I couldn't stop them. "But Grandma wanted. She left that money for me, for this. She trusted you, Dad. I trusted you." My father's face hardened. "Don't you dare make me the villain here. I have worked my entire life to provide for this family. I have given you everything. A nice home, nice clothes, a good education. And now you're going to throw a tantrum over money that is, technically, mine to manage? I am the executor of that estate. I made a decision. It was the right decision." "It was Grandma's money," I shouted, standing up. I had never shouted at my father before, ever. The look on his face was terrifying. "She gave it to me, not to you, not to the business, to me." He stood up too, his face red with anger. "You watch your mouth, young lady. You are grounded. No phone, no computer, no going out. You will go to state school, and you will be grateful for it. And we will never speak of this again. Do you understand me?" I looked at my mother, hoping for some support, some sign that she was on my side. But she just sat there, her eyes cast down, twisting her pearl necklace between her fingers. She wasn't going to help me. She never helped me. And Mark, he was leaning against the doorframe, having overheard the whole thing. He just shook his head at me with a slight, pitying smirk, as if to say, "Tough luck, kid." He didn't say a word in my defense. He never did. I ran to my room, slammed the door, and threw myself on my bed. Buster came over and licked my hand, whimpering softly. I buried my face in his fur and sobbed. I sobbed for my grandmother. I sobbed for my dream. I sobbed for the family I was just beginning to see for what it really was. That was the first real betrayal. The first time I saw the mask slip and the cold, selfish creature lurking beneath. But I was still a child, desperate for their love and approval. I swallowed my rage, my grief, my utter devastation. I convinced myself they were right. It was a sacrifice. A family sticks together. I pushed my hurt down so deep I thought I had buried it forever. The next few weeks were a blur of misery. I went to school, I did my work, I came home. I didn't talk to my parents unless I had to. I stopped drawing. Every time I picked up a pencil, I thought of Grandma Rose, and the pain was too much. I let my portfolio gather dust in the corner of my room. I went to state school. I majored in marketing because my father said it was practical. I took art classes as electives, but it wasn't the same. The fire had gone out. I was just going through the motions, a ghost in my own life. For the next decade, I played my part. I got my degree, got a decent job at a marketing firm in Columbus, and moved into a small apartment. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom on the third floor of an old building, but it was mine. I decorated it with prints of famous paintings, trying to surround myself with the art I had given up on. I dated, had my heart broken, and dated again. There was a guy named Tom for a while, a nice guy who worked in it. He asked me once why I seemed so sad sometimes. I told him I was just tired. I never told him about my family. I never told anyone. I went home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, smiling the right smiles, saying the right things. I watched Mark take over my father's now thriving construction business. I watched my parents dote on his perfect wife, a blonde woman named Stephanie, and their two perfect children, a boy and a girl. I was the outsider at the family gatherings, the one who didn't quite fit, the one whose life was just a little too ordinary for their grand narrative. I was the ghost at the feast, still haunted by the loss of a dream I'd never been allowed to pursue. At Christmas, my nephew and niece would open presents worth hundreds of dollars, while I got a gift card to a department store. At Thanksgiving, Mark would hold forth about his latest business success while my father beamed with pride. And my mother would float between us all, making sure the table looked perfect, making sure the conversation stayed pleasant, making sure no one mentioned the elephant in the room. Me, my failure to live up to their expectations. My ordinary life. Buster died during those years. He got old and sick, and my mother called to tell me they had to put him down. I didn't even get to say goodbye. I cried for 3 days. He was the last real friend I had in that house. Then, my father got sick. It was pancreatic cancer, a diagnosis that felt like a death sentence from the moment it was uttered. The fortress was crumbling. My mother was a wreck, a shadow of her former perfectly coiffed self. She stopped wearing her pearls. She stopped tending her garden. She just sat in the living room, staring at nothing. Mark was suddenly the man of the house, taking charge of my father's care, making the big decisions, puffing up with a self-importance that made my stomach turn. He would call me with updates, his voice dripping with importance. The doctors say it's spreading. I'm consulting with a specialist from Cleveland. Don't worry, I'm handling everything. As if I was just some bystander, not his sister, not my father's daughter. And I, the dutiful daughter, drove home every weekend. It was a 3-hour drive each way, but I did it. I sat with my father through his chemo sessions. I held his hand while he slept. I listened to him reminisce about building his first house, about meeting my mother, about his own childhood. In those quiet, painful moments, I found a sliver of the father I had always longed for. He was vulnerable, scared, and human. One afternoon, when he was particularly weak, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. "You know, Ella, you were always my favorite." I almost laughed. "Dad, you don't have to say that." "I mean it," he whispered. Mark is like me, too much like me maybe, but you have your grandmother's heart. You're the good one, the kind one." I always knew that. I didn't know what to say. All those years of feeling invisible, and now, at the end, he was telling me this. He apologized too, in a roundabout way. "That money thing, Ella," he whispered one afternoon, his voice thin and reedy. "I did what I thought was best. You know that, right?" I just squeezed his hand, unable to speak. Part of me wanted to scream, "No, you did what was best for you." But the other part, the part that was still that 16-year-old girl desperate for his love, just wanted to give him peace. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I know, Dad." He died on a crisp autumn morning, with the sun painting his hospital room in shades of gold. I was holding his hand. My mother was sobbing in the corner. Mark was on the phone, already making arrangements. In his final moments, he looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or love, I'll never know. He took his last breath, and just like that, he was gone. The funeral was a grand affair, as was fitting for a man like Richard Lawson. The church was packed. People said wonderful things about him. He was a pillar of the community, a generous man, a loving father. I sat in the front row, numb, listening to this eulogy for a man I realized I had never truly known. Mark gave a speech. He talked about what a great mentor his father was, how he had taught him everything about business, about being a man. He didn't mention me. He didn't mention our mother. It was all about him. After the burial, we gathered at the family home. The house was full of people, the air thick with the smell of flowers and casseroles and murmured condolences. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, accepting hugs, shaking hands, playing my part one last time. People kept telling me how sorry they were, how much they loved my father. I just nodded and smiled, my face aching from the effort. A few days later, the family gathered in my father's study for the reading of the will. My mother, Mark, and me. The family lawyer, a man named Mr. Harrison who had known my father for 40 years, sat behind the big oak desk. He adjusted his glasses and began to read in a dry, monotone voice. The usual things: personal effects to my mother, a few small charitable donations. Then he got to the main part of the estate: the house, the business, the investments. My mother would get a lifetime interest in the house and a monthly allowance. The bulk of the estate, including the thriving construction company, was left to Mark. It was what we all expected. He was the son, the heir, the one who would carry on the Lawson name and legacy. I sat there, listening, feeling like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. I wasn't expecting anything. I had learned long ago not to expect anything from my family. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. And to my daughter, Ella Marie Lawson, I leave a final acknowledgement of a debt long overdue, along with my sincere hope that she will use this to finally pursue the dreams I once so carelessly stole from her. He looked up, then slid a single sheet of paper across the desk towards me. It was a cashier's check, made out to me, for $150,000. My breath caught in my throat. The room went silent. I could feel Mark's eyes boring into the side of my head, feel the tension radiating from my mother. A debt long overdue, he knew. He knew what he had done all those years ago, and in the end, it had weighed on him. He had tried to make it right. I looked at the check, then at my mother. Her face was pale, unreadable. I looked at Mark. His jaw was clenched, his knuckles white where he gripped the arm of his chair. He didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead at Mr. Harrison. "Is there a problem, Mark?" Mr. Harrison asked, his voice even. Mark finally turned his head, his gaze like ice. "No," he said, his voice clipped. "No problem, if that's what my father wanted." The reading ended shortly after. Mark stormed out of the house without a word. My mother retreated to her room, claiming a headache. I was left alone in the study, holding the check. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than it should have. It wasn't just money. It was an apology, an admission, a key that had been returned to me, a key to a door I had thought was sealed forever. I should have been elated. I should have been planning my next move, thinking about art school, about finally living the life I'd dreamed of. But all I felt was a deep, churning unease. The look in Mark's eyes wasn't just surprise or even resentment. It was something darker. It was the look of a man who believed he was entitled to everything, and who had just seen a piece of his inheritance, his birthright, handed to the family ghost. The first few weeks after the will were a strange, silent war. My mother called me, her voice dripping with a forced cheerfulness, suggesting I invest that money wisely or put it towards a sensible down payment on a condo. She would say things like, "You know, Mark could help you with that. He knows all about finances." As if I would ever trust Mark with my money. Mark didn't call at all, not once. When I went to the house to collect some of my old things, he was there, going through my father's desk. He didn't say hello. He just looked at me, his eyes flat and hard. "That money," he said, his voice low, "it's going to cause problems." "It's my money, Mark," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Dad wanted me to have it." He slammed a drawer shut. Dad was sick. He wasn't thinking straight. That money should stay in the business. It's what's best for the family, for Mom's future, for everyone. "It's my money," I repeated, clutching the strap of my bag. "And I'm going to use it to go to art school, like I always wanted." A cold, humorless smile spread across his face. "Art school, right. Well, don't come crying to me when it's all gone and you have nothing." He turned his back on me, a clear dismissal. I left the house that day feeling more alone than I ever had. The family fortress was in ruins, and my brother was now the king of the rubble, and he had made it clear I was no longer welcome within its broken walls. I moved forward. I quit my job. It was terrifying, walking away from a steady paycheck, from the only security I had ever known. But every time I doubted myself, I thought of Grandma Rose. I thought of her hands holding my face. I thought of her voice saying, Don't you ever let anyone tell you different. I applied to RISD again, a decade and a half late. I had to rebuild my portfolio from scratch. I spent weeks drawing, painting, creating. It was like coming home. My hands remembered what my heart had never forgotten. When the acceptance letter came, I sat on my apartment floor and cried. Happy tears this time, tears of relief, tears of triumph. The day I received my acceptance, I didn't call my mother or Mark. I drove to the cemetery and sat by my father's grave. I told him I was going to do it. I told him I forgave him. I told him I wished he could have seen me off, as a father should. I cried then, tears for the lost years, for the stolen dream, for the complicated, flawed man who had both broken my heart and, in the end, tried to mend it. My mother's reaction to my decision was a masterclass in passive aggression. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she said over the phone. "Rhode Island, so far away. Well, I suppose you have to do what makes you happy. Mark thinks you're making a huge mistake, of course. He's just worried about you." She made it all about them. My dream was an inconvenience to their narrative. I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I was doing something for me. I packed up my apartment, sold most of my furniture, and moved to Providence. A girl of 33 starting over in a world of 18-year-olds. It was terrifying and exhilarating. The first day of class, I walked into a studio full of kids half my age. They looked at me with curiosity, probably wondering if I was the professor. I found a seat in the back and tried to make myself small, just like I used to do at family dinners. But then the professor started talking, and I forgot about everyone else. I was lost in the lesson, in the smell of paint and turpentine, in the scratch of charcoal on paper. I was finally home. I was terrible at first. My skills were rusty from years of neglect. The 18-year-olds had been drawing every day for years. I had been making PowerPoint presentations and writing marketing copy. My first few projects were embarrassing. The professor, a kind woman named Dr. Chen, pulled me aside after class one day. "Ella, your concepts are strong," she said. "Your eye is good, but your technique needs work. You're out of practice." "I know," I said, close to tears. "I haven't really drawn in 15 years, she smiled. "Then you have 15 years of catching up to do. But here's the thing about art, Ella. It's not a race. It's a journey. You'll get there, just keep working." And I did. I worked harder than I had ever worked in my life. I stayed up all night in the studio, my hands covered in charcoal and paint. I went in on weekends when the building was empty. I drew until my hand cramped. I painted until my eyes blurred. And slowly, I got better. The other students started to notice. They would come over and look at my work, asking questions, offering compliments. I made friends for the first time in years. Real friends. People who loved art as much as I did. People who didn't care about the Lawson family or my father's money or my brother's success. They just cared about me. There was Sarah, a girl from Texas with a laugh that filled the room. There was Miguel, a quiet boy from California who painted the most beautiful landscapes. There was James, an older guy like me who had gone back to school after his kids left for college. We became a little family. We critiqued each other's work, celebrated each other's successes, and supported each other through the inevitable failures. 2 years flew by in a blur of creativity and self-discovery. I got my BFA, graduating with honors. At the graduation ceremony, Dr. Chen gave a speech about me. She talked about how I had come to RISD with a dream deferred and how I had worked tirelessly to make that dream come true. My friends cheered. I cried. It was the proudest moment of my life. I stayed in Providence after graduation. I found a small studio apartment in an old building near the college. It had big windows that let in lots of light, perfect for painting. I started to build a life as a freelance illustrator. It was a struggle, financially. Some months I barely made rent, but I was happy. I was poor, but I was rich in a way I had never been before. I started getting small commissions. First, it was book covers for small presses, then editorial illustrations for magazines, then a children's book that actually got published. My work was finding an audience. I was building a name for myself, not as Ella Lawson, the overlooked daughter, but as Ella Marie, the artist. I would send postcards of my illustrations to my friends. I would post my work on social media and watch the likes and comments roll in. It was validating in a way I had never experienced. People saw my work. People liked my work. People valued what I created. My contact with my family dwindled to sporadic, stilted phone calls with my mother and a cold silence from Mark. I sent them invitations to my graduation. They didn't come. My mother sent a card with a $50 bill in it. Mark sent nothing. The distance, both physical and emotional, was a balm. I was healing. I was learning to define myself not as the overlooked Lawson daughter, but as Ella, the artist. The ghost was finally becoming a person. Then, about a year after graduation, the world I had so carefully built began to tremble. It started with an email from my bank. A notification about a large withdrawal from my savings account. A withdrawal I hadn't made. My heart hammered against my ribs as I logged into my account. My checking account was fine. But the savings account, the one that held the last remnants of my father's gift, the money I had been so careful to guard, was almost empty. A series of transfers had siphoned nearly $40,000 out of it over the past 2 weeks. I stared at the screen, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. $40,000. Gone. I refreshed the page, hoping it was a glitch. But the numbers didn't change. The balance was just wrong, so wrong. I felt the blood drain from my face. I immediately called the bank, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. I got put on hold, transferred, put on hold again. I sat there for what felt like hours, listening to terrible elevator music, my heart pounding in my ears. Finally, after a frantic hour, I got an answer. The transfers had been made online, using my password from an IP address in Ohio. Ohio. The word hit me like a physical blow. There was only one place, one person that could be connected to. I knew, with a sick, cold certainty, who had done this. I thought of Mark, the golden boy, the king of his own little empire, and his flat, hard eyes. I thought of his resentment over the money. I thought of his sense of entitlement. Had he really done this? Had he really stolen from his own sister? I called the bank's fraud department. I filed a police report in Providence. The detective who took my statement was a young woman named Detective Miller. She was sympathetic but honest. "These things can take time," she said, typing notes into her computer. "And if the IP address is in another state, it gets complicated. We'll need to coordinate with law enforcement in Ohio. Do you have any idea who might have done this? Anyone who would have access to your personal information?" My mind raced. My birthday, my mother's maiden name, things a brother would know. I remembered, years ago, using my laptop at the family house, the Wi-Fi network wide open. Had he somehow installed a keylogger? Had he watched me type my passwords? The betrayal felt so intimate, so violating. It wasn't just about the money, it was the sheer, calculated cruelty of it. "I think it was my brother," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Detective Miller looked up, her expression softening. "I'm sorry," she said. "That's a hard thing to deal with." I decided to confront him, not over the phone. I needed to see his face. I needed to look him in the eye and hear him deny it. I booked a flight to Columbus and rented a car. I didn't tell my mother I was coming. I didn't tell anyone. The flight was short, but it felt endless. I stared out the window at the clouds, trying to prepare myself. What would I say? What would he say? What would I do if he admitted it? What would I do if he denied it? I drove straight to the Lawson construction office, a sleek, modern building my father would have been proud of. It had a glass front and a big sign with the company logo. It looked successful. It looked like Mark had done well for himself. It was late afternoon. The parking lot was mostly empty. I walked past the receptionist, a young woman who tried to stop me. "Ma'am, you need to check in," she said, standing up. "I'm his sister," I said, not slowing down. "He'll see me." I burst into Mark's office without knocking. He was sitting behind a massive desk, just like our father used to, talking on his cell phone. The office was nice. Expensive furniture, original art on the walls, a view of the city. He looked up, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of genuine surprise on his face before it was replaced by that familiar, cold mask. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, hanging up. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Ella, this is a surprise. What brings you to the motherland?" I didn't sit down. I walked right up to his desk and placed the bank statement in front of him. "You know exactly why I'm here." He glanced at the paper, then back at me, his expression unreadable. "No, enlighten me." $40,000, Mark. Stolen from my savings account. transferred from an IP address in Ohio. He raised an eyebrow, a perfect imitation of our father's skeptical look. And you're here accusing me? Your own brother, based on some IP address. That's weak, Ella, even for you. Don't play games with me, I hissed, my voice trembling with rage. You're the only one who would do this. You've resented me ever since Dad gave me that money. You think it's yours. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. He was taller than me, and he used his height to try to intimidate me. I think it's family money, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. Money that should have stayed in the family business. Money our father was too weak and sentimental to keep where it belonged. You took it and threw it away on some childish fantasy. You've been a drain on this family your whole life, Ella. You don't contribute, you don't belong, you just take. His words were like knives, each one aimed at the most vulnerable parts of me. The old Ella the ghost would have shrunk away, apologized for existing. But I wasn't that girl anymore. Providence had made me strong. My art had given me a backbone. My friends had shown me what real love looked like. You stole from me, I said, my voice clear and cold. I have the proof. And I will pursue this. I will press charges. He laughed then, a harsh, ugly sound. Press charges? Go ahead. You think you can beat me? I have the best lawyers in the state. I have connections. I have the family name. You have nothing. You're a nobody with a paintbrush. By the time my lawyers are done with you, they'll make you look like a bitter, delusional woman trying to extort money from her successful brother. Is that the story you want? Is that how you want the world to see you? I stared at him, my blood running cold, the sheer arrogance, the absolute confidence that he was untouchable. He wasn't just a thief. He was a predator, and he was so sure of his power, of his place in the world, that he didn't even see me as a threat. He saw me as prey that had foolishly wandered back into his territory. Get out of my office, Ella, he said, turning his back on me just as he had years ago. Go back to your little art studio and your imaginary life, and stay away from this family. I walked out of that office in a daze. The confrontation had left me feeling hollow and raw. He was right about one thing: taking him on would be a war I might not win. The family name, his connections, his money, they were all weapons I didn't have. I went to a small motel on the outskirts of town, lay on the scratchy bed, and stared at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of fear, anger, and despair. Was he right? Was I a nobody? Could I really fight him? I thought about Detective Miller, about her honest eyes. I thought about the police report. I thought about the evidence. Maybe I had a chance. Maybe, but then I thought about the cost, the legal fees, the stress, the way they would drag my name through the mud, the way they would try to destroy everything I had built. Mark had the resources to make that happen. He had the motivation. And I was just one person, with a small studio apartment and a fledgling career. The next morning, I drove to my mother's house. I needed to see her. I needed to know if she knew, if she was a part of this. The house looked different. Smaller somehow. The flower boxes were empty, the geraniums long dead. The porch swing was still, covered in leaves. The whole place had an air of neglect, of sadness. My mother was in the garden, a place she spent most of her time now, tending to her roses. She looked older, smaller, wrapped in a cardigan even though the day was warm. Her hair, once so perfectly coiffed, was gray and unkempt. When she saw me, her face registered a flicker of something, surprise, and then a guarded wariness. Ella, she said, straightening up, pulling her gardening gloves off. What a surprise, you should have called. We need to talk, Mom. I followed her into the house. It was the same, yet different. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of potpourri and loneliness. My father's presence was gone, erased. There were no pictures of him on the walls anymore, just pictures of Mark's family, his children, his perfect life. I was nowhere. She made us tea, a ritual she clung to, and we sat in the sunroom. It used to be my favorite room in the house, full of light and plants. Now it felt dim, tired. Mom, Mark stole money from me. $40,000 from my savings account. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look shocked. She looked tired. She looked down at her teacup, her fingers tracing the rim. I was afraid something like this would happen, she said quietly. I stared at her. You knew he was going to do this. No, of course not, she said quickly, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. I didn't know he would do this, but I knew he was upset about the money. He's been under so much pressure, Ella. The business, the family. Your father's death hit him hard. He feels a tremendous responsibility. He's a thief, Mom. He stole from me. She flinched at my tone. Don't be so dramatic. It's family money. It's complicated. Mark is the head of the family now. He has to make sure everything is secure. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was defending him. She was making excuses for him. The pattern of my entire life was repeating itself, right in front of me. The golden boy could do no wrong. I was the one being dramatic. Mom, I'm going to the police. I'm going to press charges. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with alarm. You can't do that, Ella. Think of the scandal. Think of the family name. Think of Mark's children. You would destroy this family over money? Over money, I repeated, my voice rising. It's not about the money. It's about betrayal. It's about my brother stealing from me. It's about you, for 40 years, choosing him over me every single time. I stood up, my whole body shaking. Dad stole my dream, and you told me to be understanding. Mark steals my future, and you tell me to be quiet for the sake of the family name. What about me, Mom? What about my name? What about my life? I am your daughter. Doesn't that mean anything to you? My mother just sat there, a small, frail figure clutching her teacup, her eyes filling with tears. But they weren't tears for me. They were tears for the family, for the perfect image she had spent her entire life constructing, now crumbling around her. She was the architect of the mask, and she was willing to sacrifice me one more time to keep it from shattering completely. Please, Ella, she whispered. Don't do this. We're all you have. No, I said, my voice breaking. You're not. I have friends who love me. I have a life that I built all by myself without any of you. You're not all I have. You're nothing I have. I left her there. I walked out of that house and I didn't look back. I drove back to my motel, the full weight of my family's sickness finally crushing down on me. It wasn't just Mark. It was a system. A toxic, dysfunctional system where I was the designated scapegoat, the one who had to absorb all the pain and sacrifice so the golden child could shine. And my mother was its high priestess. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, going over every option in my head. Fight a war I might lose and in the process, air every piece of dirty laundry my family had. Or walk away, let him get away with it, and let the poison continue to spread. I thought about my art. I thought about the world I had built in Providence. It was small, but it was mine. It was clean. It was honest. I thought about my friends, Sarah and Miguel and James. I thought about Dr. Chen, who believed in me. I thought about the children's book I was illustrating, the one that was going to be published next year. I thought about all the people who had supported me, who had seen me, who had loved me for who I was. I thought about Mark's threat, a bitter, delusional woman trying to extort money. He had the resources to make that story stick. He could drag my name, my art, everything I had built, through the mud. He could win. And even if I won a legal battle, what would be left of me? What would be left of the fragile peace I had found? I thought about Grandma Rose. I thought about her hands holding my face. I thought about her voice saying, "This is who you are." Who was I? Was I a fighter? Was I a victim? Was I an artist? Was I a sister? Was I a daughter? I decided who I was. I was Ella Marie. And Ella Marie valued her peace more than she valued revenge. The next morning, I made a decision. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about survival. It was about choosing my own peace over a war with people who were incapable of love or loyalty. I called Detective Miller in Providence and told her I was dropping the investigation. I could hear the disappointment in her voice, but she understood. She'd seen it before, she said. Families were complicated. They can be the worst kind of poison, she said softly. Take care of yourself, Ella. Then I called my mother. I'm not pressing charges, I told her. But I'm done. I'm done with this family. Don't call me. Don't email me. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have a brother and I don't have a mother. I am a Lawson by name only, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to forget what that name means. She started to speak, to protest, to offer some weak defense, but I hung up the phone. It was the most liberating and the most painful thing I have ever done. It felt like performing surgery on my own heart, cutting out a diseased part to save the rest of the organ. I flew back to Providence. I went to my little studio apartment, sat on the floor, and finally I let myself grieve. Not for my father, not for the money, but for the family I never had. For the mother who should have protected me. For the brother who should have loved me. for the little girl named Ella Marie Lawson who spent her whole life trying to earn a place at a table where she was never truly welcome. I grieved for her, and then I began the long, slow process of letting her go. My friends rallied around me. Sarah came over with ice cream and let me cry on her shoulder. Miguel brought me coffee and sat with me in comfortable silence while I painted. James took me out to dinner and told me stories about his own complicated family. They didn't judge me. They didn't tell me what I should have done. They just loved me. That was 5 years ago. Today, I am Ella Marie. Just Ella Marie. I dropped the Lawson legally a few years after everything happened. It felt like a weight being lifted. I am no longer defined by that name, by that family, by that history. I am my own person. My illustration career is thriving. That children's book I was working on, it won an award. I've illustrated a dozen more since then. My work has been in galleries. I have a small but loyal following of collectors who love my style. I teach a class at RISD now, once a week. I love watching the young artists find their way, remembering how lost I was at their age. I have friends who are my chosen family. Sarah is still my best friend. She moved to Providence a few years ago, and we have dinner together every Sunday. Miguel moved to New York, but we talk on the phone every month. James retired and moved to Florida, but he sends me postcards from his travels. I even fell in love. His name is David. He's a high school art teacher, kind and patient and funny. He loves me in a way I never thought I deserved. He looks at my paintings and tells me they're beautiful. He holds my hand when I have bad dreams. He makes me laugh. We live together now, in a bigger apartment with even better light. He's teaching me that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about choice. I never heard from my mother or Mark again. Not a word. For a while, I checked online, morbidly curious. I saw that the construction company went through some tough times. There were rumors of mismanagement, of bad investments, of lawsuits. I felt a flicker of something, not satisfaction, but a grim confirmation. The poison was still at work. It was consuming them from the inside. I heard through a high school friend that my mother sold the house and moved into a smaller place. That she rarely left the house anymore. That Mark's marriage fell apart. That his kids were having trouble in school. I felt sad, but not for them. I felt sad for the children, for the cycle of dysfunction that would probably continue for another generation. Then, last week, I got a letter. It was in my mother's handwriting, forwarded from my old address. I almost threw it away unopened. But some morbid curiosity, some lingering thread of the daughter I used to be, made me tear it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in her shaky, spidery script. It was short. It said that Mark had been diagnosed with the same cancer that killed our father. It was aggressive, she wrote. He didn't have long. She said he wanted to see me. He had something he needed to tell me. She included a phone number and a plea. Please, Ella, for the family, for the family. Those 3 words that had been used to manipulate and control me my entire life. I sat in my studio, the afternoon light streaming in, casting long shadows across my latest painting. David was at work. The apartment was quiet. I looked at the letter for a long time. I thought of Mark, the golden boy, now facing his own mortality. I thought of his arrogance, his cruelty, his theft. I thought of his cold eyes and his threatening words. I thought of the $40,000 I would never get back. I thought of all the years I had spent feeling invisible, worthless, less than. I thought of my mother, alone in whatever small house she was in, the mask finally, irrevocably shattered. I thought of her choosing him over me, again and again until the very end. I thought of her tears, which were never for me. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a deep, bone-weary sadness, and I felt nothing. A vast, empty nothing where my family used to live. I haven't called. I don't know if I will. Part of me thinks that going back would be walking into the lion's den one last time. That whatever he has to say, it will just be another manipulation. Another attempt to rewrite history, to make himself the victim, to ask for a forgiveness I'm not sure I have to give. But another part of me, a part I thought I had buried, wonders. Wonders what he could possibly have to tell me. Is it a confession? Is it remorse? Is it one final, cruel twist? Or is it just another lie, another way to control me, even from his deathbed? I talked to David about it last night. We sat on our little balcony, watching the sun go down over the city. I read him the letter. He listened quietly, holding my hand. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "Part of me wants to go. Part of me wants to hear what he has to say. Part of me thinks it's a trap." "It might be," he said gently. "But you're not the same person you were, Ella. You're stronger now. You have a life here. You have people who love you. Whatever you decide, I'll support you." I leaned my head on his shoulder. "What if I go and it just opens up all the old wounds? Then I'll be here to help you heal them again." I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe the story isn't over. Maybe the final chapter is still to be written. But this time, I hold the pen, and I'm not sure I want to write myself back into their tragedy. I've worked too hard to build my own story, my own happy ending. For now, I'm here, in my light-filled studio, with a paintbrush in my hand and a world of my own creation waiting for me on a blank canvas. My name is Ella Marie, and my story is my own. Whatever happens next, I know that I will be okay, because I am not the ghost anymore. I am the artist. I am the one who creates. And I have finally learned that the most important family you can have is the one you choose for yourself.